Political correspondent Stephen Walker.
Just over 90 years ago, Northern Ireland's first Parliament met here in South Belfast, at what is now Union College. Time has taken its toll on this great building, and it's now undergoing a major refurbishment.
Here they haven't forgotten their place in history. This was the forerunner to Stormont, and there change is also on the cards. For months this building has been under scaffolding, but inside the chamber, reform is afoot. A move that would alter the way we're governed and spell an end to the five-party executive. The principle of setting up an official opposition was contained in the Stormont House Agreement. John McAllister is currently drafting a private member's bill that includes the creation of an opposition. He says this week's political fallout from the budget illustrates why one is needed.
But to have government ministers voting against the budget, then that decision becoming public, then going out onto the media and the airwaves and saying why they're voting against it, while accepting more money and staying with the trappings of office, just means that ministers effectively, it makes it look like a vanity project.
So could the existence of an opposition really transform politics here? John Taylor was Home Affairs Minister at Stormont in the 1970s. He became the deputy leader of the Ulster Unionists, but is no longer in the party. He thinks the time has come for the UUP and the SDLP to go into opposition.
I think at the moment the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists, being very small parties in the executive at Stormont, are getting squeezed out. They're both losing ground politically. It's a bit like the Liberal Democrats going into the coalition here in the United Kingdom. They've lost out badly as well. I think the Unionists and the SDLP would benefit if they went into the official opposition, and that would be a sharing of Unionists with Nationalists.
The Stormont House Agreement states that proposals to set up an official opposition will be brought forward by March. However, Sinn Féin's Martin McGuinness doesn't think any of the smaller parties will actually take that option up. But is that the case? For example, would the Ulster Unionist Party leave the executive?
The decision on whether or not we go into opposition is one we will take, and the first thing we need to know is what actual space are we going to create post the Stormont House Agreement. We haven't had those conversations yet with the other executive parties.
Some would say that even if you could go into opposition, you won't take that opportunity.
We will not dance to Martin McGuinness's tune. If we ever decide to go into opposition, it will be on our terms and our timing. But before we even consider that, let's create the space and let's see what resources will be made available.
Eileen Bell is a former Alliance MLA and Stormont speaker. She says the smaller parties in the executive will soon have to make their minds up.
If they really want an opposition, I think they should do that. I think they should leave that executive and take up their positions as a sort of coalition of opposition. That would be a start.
So would the smaller parties really be prepared to give up their ministries? One suggestion is that in the future, executive positions would be linked to the number of assembly seats, and that parties would need at least 18 seats before they could go into government.
That's why I'm saying let's set a limit on it and say if you don't reach that limit, you're not qualifying for government. You might get, you'll get an extra committee chairmanship and be part of a robust opposition. But they need themselves to come to this point that they have the courage to say, actually, we want to be outside of government.
Over 90 years ago in this room, this is where Northern Ireland's leaders cut their political teeth. Of course, the situation then and the situation now is very different. At Stormont, the whole question about opposition raises a whole series of issues. For example, how could opposition parties work together? And what kind of speaking rights would members of the opposition have? To some, the establishment of an opposition at Stormont cuts right to the heart of a democratic society.
At the moment, the real opposition is provided by Jim Allister of the traditional Unionist Party. I think it would create more normal democratic procedures in the Assembly at Stormont. And I think it would create a situation whereby the opposition parties, in particular the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP, could in some time become the new government of Northern Ireland.
So should the SDLP join forces with the Ulster Unionists and market themselves as a government in waiting?
I already have had such cries, if you like, from members of the public. People have stopped me in the street and said, could you two parties not get your act together? After all, it was the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist parties that made the compromises that brought us to this place.
The creation of our current political structures was part of the architecture of the Good Friday Agreement. But all plans need to be revamped, and in the coming weeks, Stormont may be getting another facelift.